Good.
Sure.
All right. At this time, we'll call the May 15th, 2023 Planning Board meeting to order. We've got a full house, so we have a quorum, so if everybody will please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. This time, we'll move on to item 2A, approval of the meeting minutes from the March 20th, 23 Planning Board meeting. The purpose of this agenda is to consider approval of those meeting minutes, and has everybody had a chance to review them? If so, questions, comments, corrections, or motions?
Move they be approved as written.
Got a motion? Have a second?
Second.
Anybody else have any other before we? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right, at this time, we'll move into the public hearing items. Public hearings are a time for petitioners to present requests and for the public to state their concerns and voice opinions in favor of or in opposition to these requests. If you wish to speak, please come to the podium, sign in on the sign-in provided, state your name and address for the record before speaking in regard to the request. At this time, we'll go into public hearing item 4A, zoning map amendment, Malden Watkins Surveying, 218 King Street, PIN 0666092393, REZ 2023-03. Purpose of this agenda item is to consider a requested zoning map amendment for a total of 0.618 acres located at 218 King Street from Downtown Center 2 zoning district to the Town Center Residential zoning district. Further information provided by staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, Board. This is the second planning board we've had with the new presentation format. So as a reminder, I'll be giving a high-level summary and then be available for any questions or items you'd like me to cover more in depth. I'm entering the agenda abstract and the supporting documents into the official record of the town. This is rezoning 2023-03 at 218 King Street. Mr. Malden is requesting this rezoning on behalf of his client, Hancock Investments, LLC, in order to develop 2 single-family homes at the location. Mr. Malden has proposed the following conditions for this project. Number 1, front-facing garages shall have decorative details such as carriage-style adornments, windows, or barn-style doors. Number 2, vinyl siding is prohibited except for windows, decorative elements, and trim. Number 3, a street tree will be provided in the front yard of each lot. Number 4, all homes shall have a front door with a minimum 35% glazing, transom, and/or door side lights. Number 5, lots will be used for residential purposes only. And number 6, sewer will be extended from the existing manhole to a new manhole at the edge of the new property line. The petitioner, Wayne Malden, is here if there are any questions, and I am also happy to answer any questions.
All right. Do anybody have any questions for staff before we open the public hearing? All right. At this time, we'll open the public hearing. I'll open the public to anybody wishes to speak in favor of REZ 2023-03.
Good evening. Wayne Malden with Malden Watkins Surveying at 139 North Main Street here in Fuquay. And we did put this rezoning together for Mr. Hancock that you're looking at tonight. If any of you been by there, it's beside Alexis McLean's old house that has just been remodeled on King Street there. And he is trying to build his, what he's called his retirement home in Fuquay there. So if any got any questions, I'll be glad to try to answer them.
Any questions for
I
me?
actually did have a question. As I drove by there, so there's a lot of large heritage trees on there. Are any of them going to be able to be preserved?
We're gonna try to save both of them.
Okay, good, because that's the one thing I noticed.
There is
I'm looking at the survey and where I saw those trees, and it's like.
There's one in the middle there that's gonna be close.
Yeah, so, okay. That
Won't
is.
know till we see if we can sneak the driveway around.
Not that it's just, it's good to see that when we have those, especially in the downtown area where we have those heritage trees.
Yeah, one of them's in pretty good shape, one of them's about.
Yeah,
dead.
some of it, yeah, it was
Yeah,
hard to
rotten on the
tell
backside.
what their condition was.
About 2 feet deep in it, so that one will probably go.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Anyone else?
Any other questions for Wayne?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to speak in favor? Not seeing a lot of participants here. I guess we'll switch it over to anybody want to speak in opposition. All right. I guess at this time we'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the board for any other questions for staff, and if not, motions. I just have one question, kind of relates to the trees. As Ed pointed out was, if they do have to adjust the driveway, I know they submit plot plans, do they get any allowances to like adjust this a little bit, you know, if they want to miss a tree or something like that?
Yes, so basically, once something is rezoned TCR, as long as it meets the intent and all the, because we have TCR standards.
Right.
Small adjustments, in fact, we've even discussed that small additions and things like that could be added to these. If they wanted to add a deck or something, they don't need to come back and rezone, as long as they're working within the parameters of the TCR standards.
All right, cool. All right, that makes great sense. All right, any other questions for staff? If not, entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to recommend approval of REZ-2023-03 as presented by staff.
Got a motion? Got a second? And we have a second. Any other questions before we take a vote? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We'll be moving on to public hearing item 4B, Town Code Amendment, our favorite. Purpose of this agenda item is to consider a proposed text amendment to the Town Code of Ordinances, Part 9 Land Development Ordinance, Amendment Number 23, that addresses several areas for improvement. This will be Amendment CTA 23-01. Further information provided by staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm entering the agenda abstract and supporting documents into the official record of the town. This is CTA 2023-01, Amendment Number 23. This amendment is reflective of requests made by management and staff in order to better align the land development ordinance with the goals of the town, provide more flexibility in the development process, and to correct general errors and technical oversights. There are two main parts of this amendment that I wanted to cover tonight in more detail. The first is the edits made to the compact and electrical vehicles language in the LDO. As EVs become more in demand, staff felt it was important to align the development regulations with growing national trends. Staff have proposed increasing the requirement for EV-specific parking spots that would include charging stations, or at the very least, the ability to add charging stations as demand called for it. Currently, the LDO does not have a requirement for EV parking bays or developments with less than 100 parking spaces. This amendment proposes a minimum 5% dedication of parking lot spaces in new construction to be dedicated to EV parking. These spaces are required to be EV installed, meaning that on day one of the parking lot operation, an EV could be charged at the bay. An additional 5% would be required to be EV capable, meaning that all infrastructure is in place for the chargers if and when demand requires more EV installed spaces. These standards have replaced the requirement for compact spaces, although still allowed, compact spaces will no longer be a requirement for new construction. The second topic on this amendment is the expansion of the cottage-style homes as a use type within the TCR and PUD zoning districts. Cottage-style homes are smaller detached homes, typically one story and less than 1,200 square feet, that occur in clusters or pods. Cottage-style homes have been permissible development type for several years in the TCR zoning district, and recently staff has seen a shift towards the style of housing, both as multifamily and single-family product. This use type has been added to the permitted use table, and use standards have been added to the TCR and PUD appendices, respectively. Use standards include number of units, minimum development size, lot configuration, common area, cross-access utilities, maximum cottage sizes, architectural design, and parking. These are just the biggest parts of this amendment. If there's anything else that you wish me to go over further in detail, I am happy to do so, and I am here to answer any questions.
Questions for staff before we open the public hearing up?
With our EV standards, are there any requirements of the parking has to be in the front, side, rear of a parking lot, or can it be wherever design capable?
We didn't establish locations. I think wherever design capable would be best.
Okay.
Was there something magic about the 100 space?
I believe that was what we had in there before for the compact space requirement. It at 100 spaces that triggered the compact space requirement.
Is that like,
So-
you have any idea like threshold, like size of the building or anything like that, how it correlates? I mean, I know it's different uses require different spaces, but just 100 seems like is that just how do we get to 100? I think that's gonna be the question is 100 spaces is a pretty decent sized parking lot, but in a scheme of things, is that like a Walmart? Is that like a Target, or is that like, you know, about size, what size wise? Because if you're gonna put in 5%, there's gotta be a need for it.
Yeah, the intention would be for a larger, like, shopping center or entertainment center or movie theater, something like that, to be the ones having to install this.
But this would apply to like apartments and multifamily homes, or like that have like not multifamily homes necessarily, but like where we're doing mixed use, vertical mixed use, and we have retail. And if you have a big enough building, so this would apply to all of those uses. It's not like
Yeah.
just commercial. It's every use, residential included.
We also have an industrial user that just qualified as well.
Okay, so
Some
all
of our
uses
big
across the entire
businesses, yep.
LDO, 100 spaces. That's the threshold.
So the only thing that were exempted were educational facilities and places of worship.
Is there a reason why we exempted those?
Generally speaking, they aren't, having a charging station at a school or something like that may not be very attractive, having people stay there for long periods of time that aren't necessarily like a teacher or like a school parent or something like that. Didn't think that would be something that would be favorable.
So someone using it that's not participating in the school or the place. of
Same with the
worship.
church. That was it was security.
Security.
Right, Which
Yeah.
would be the same for the place of worship.
Right.
Same kind of concept.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this moves forward, if there's any pushback from some of these big multiplexes on people using power there and they're having to pay for it, and who's used it, and
Well,
you know, you're in a
there's-
shopping center and somebody.
There's no
can't- they can't
requirement
be
that this be free charging stations. These would
Correct.
probably be like, we have several charging stations around town where you can put your credit card in.
Yeah, sure.
So it's more about the usage of it.
Sure.
So I think.
Concerning the cottage homes, why the change? I mean, is there a particular reason or just to make it more diverse?
So we've recently had some interest in this style development and realized that our standards could be made more flexible to allow this sort of thing. We haven't really had any cottage style development since it's been part of the TCR zoning district, but we felt that it was pretty compatible with PUD zoning district standards already, so we added it into there as a potential use within a PUD. So it wouldn't just be a PUD of cottage homes, it would be a product in a PUD. But not anything particular, just an area for improvement.
Thank you.
So that was kind of the question I had was on, we don't have any currently, no examples that have been
Not that I'm aware of
within town.
within town.
I don't recall any coming through here or anything like that. I guess that, is this kind of like we're putting it, is this something that there truly is interest in? Or is there a reason that there hasn't been, I mean, are we doing something wrong to, not make it appealing to somebody to come in here and develop a cottage style?
I don't know if it's perhaps a change in the market to smaller style homes or closer,
Right.
more dense neighborhood-oriented style homes. We had interest, varying levels of interest from different people, and we looked at our standards and we were like, those could use a little bit of a cleanup and modernization and make it truly something that could be implemented. So we modeled it after some ordinance that Raleigh has and some existing subdivisions in, is it Alabama? I forget what there was one that we modeled it after pretty closely, but just a few different newer developments that are using this type of housing and that we thought would fit well within our jurisdiction as well.
Yeah, we've had cottage home available within our, LDO since it was, I mean, that was one of the kind of changes that we implemented.
Right.
And it's just, I was
So-
always like, it's gonna be really interesting when we get one in.
One of the
Yeah.
problems
Much
is
different
the
view.
cottage standards that were in there were kind of backwards. They had the green area surrounded by the roadway interior, so it was like a
Right.
glorified cul-de-sac almost, with the houses, and that's not really the cottage style. Is the
Yeah.
idea is for them to front onto a common green that's a community space with the parking on the outside. So I
Right,
think
right.
one of the reasons why we may not have seen it is it was like kind of inside out, and it really didn't serve the
Or, was it that we weren't flexible in that, or that it wasn't
Well,
clear based on the?
It was, we
example?
were not flexible. I mean,
Oh, okay.
we had, the form was inside out, truly.
It was difficult.
Okay, so we've been doing it wrong.
Basically, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
alright.
So this brings us in line. There's a lot of opportunity for missing middle housing, and this is just another
Yeah, it's
option.
a great opportunity, I think, for kind of getting attractive housing that's denser, you know, and like you said, affordable, so. I
It's
was,
the
I was always
public-
hopeful we would see it.
It's a popular product for grandparents and
Right, right,
grandchildren living in a
yes.
three-story house.
I think the other thing that this
Yeah.
did was also implemented the, kind of the multifamily option to it. The ordinance didn't have really previously. It was hard to make that cottage court work on the size lots in a single-family environment.
Right.
You're not gonna do a small house on a 5,000 square foot lot.
Right,
But
right,
if you can cluster them together, which is what this, I think, did,
yeah,
And this does also build in that flexibility. What we had before were purely fee simple lots.
Right.
So
Yeah.
this gives it the option that it can be either a multifamily opportunity that is not apartment style, so it does
Right.
not trigger the 3,000-foot rule, the spacing.
Right.
Or they can be fee simple lots, so
okay.
there's kind of, again, we're just trying to,
It'd get more flexibility, and that's probably why we haven't seen it, we just kinda, and again, I don't think, we were kinda hoping for it, but it obviously wasn't necessarily a priority for us to kinda induce
We weren't
these.
speaking the same language before.
Right.
Somebody came to us and said they wanted to do a cottage-style development. We were
We
like,
showed them that, and they're like, yeah, okay.
yeah,
yeah.
not quite the same.
Okay, well, I'm glad we were in the process of fixing that, so that we can, I mean, like I said, it's kind of, was an exciting thing when we put it in, I just,
Mhm,
be nice to get it actually functional.
mhm.
All right, any more questions before we open the public hearing? All right.
All right.
At this time, we'll open up the public hearing, and I would like to invite the public to, anybody who wishes to speak in favor of CTA 2023-01. Seeing none, we'll go to the opposition. All right, at this time, we will close the public hearing and bring it back to the board. Any more questions, comments, or a motion?
Chair, I move to recommend the approval of CTA 2023-01, amendment number 23, an amendment to the Town Code of Ordinances, Part 9 Land Development Ordinance as presented and recommended by town staff. The text amendment improves on the Land Development Ordinance and is reasonable and in the best interest of the public for the reasons identified by staff.
All right, we got a motion, we have a second?
Second.
We have a second. Before we vote, anybody else have any last-minute questions that you can come to? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. I believe we are done with public hearings. We'll move on to other business items. Item 5A, presentation on transit study and opening of the public comment period. The purpose of this agenda is to receive information regarding the draft transit study report and opening of the public comment period. Further information provided by staff. You get all of them tonight.
Me again. All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Board members, I'm pleased to introduce you tonight to Jared Draper with Tool Design Group, who have been consultants on the transit study the town undertook in the beginning in July 2022. This draft represents a culmination of nearly a year's work at assessing the feasibility of expanded transit opportunities for the town of Fuquay-Varina. Staff and the consultant kicked off this project in October of last year and have been working diligently to study two types of transit, a fixed route circulator and an express route along NC 55 highway, both of which have emerged as appropriate options for the future of transit. This draft supports recommendations in the 2035 Community Transportation Plan to develop a local service utilizing Main Street, US 401, Southeast Judd Parkway, Lakestone Commons Avenue, and Broad Street. It initiates the recommendation to develop a local service utilizing the full Judd Parkway build-out. It supports the recommendation to develop a regional service from Fuquay-Varina to Holly Springs, Apex, and eventually RTP. And it supports a recommendation to support inclusion of future transit facilities and new developments. The public comment period opened today. This draft is available for review at letstalkfv.org/transit-study, as well as a paper copy here in the lobby at Town Hall. Tomorrow, a paper copy will be made available at the South Park Community Center as well, and we'll be accepting public comments until June 12th. At this time, I will turn it over to Mr. Draper to present Tool Design Group's findings as they relate to the future of transit in Fuquay.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, Planning Board. Thanks for having me. I believe this is where we're going. Perfect. So just a quick overview. Did want to give you high level what we've done, really spend some time if there are any questions at the very end to answer those. As We just mentioned we are taking public comment so that we can refine this as necessary. So let's start with the goals for expanding transit in Fuquay-Varina. I think that we need to start with what's happening in this community and the growth that's occurred. You can see 91% from in the census decade, but in just the last 5 years, the amount of growth is really tremendous. This is very unique for this area, but not for the Triangle as a whole. We're seeing this growth all over the place. But really what this means is that we need to be thinking about mobility options of how people get around within your community and to and from your community. We do need to think about how those options support the character that you've already built and the character that you're moving toward. And so that is the basis of starting to think through how we can characterize and think about capacity in a different way and giving those choices to people, and transit being one of those tools that you can use. We also wanted to look at development. This is a really unique map when you're starting to think about the amount of development and properties that are undergoing development right now. One of the things that we noticed early on when we started to look at development patterns is that we're seeing a lot of things in that Jed Parkway kind of circle and on the outsides of town, but it doesn't mean that the places that people want to go and the destinations they want to connect to are not within that. And so we need to think about the options that really do connect people to the places they want to go and having valuable and convenient trips within your community. When we looked at community engagement, there were a variety of things that we did. We had a pop-up event at the Park and Ride where the FRX starts and stops. We had an online survey that ran December and January. We had an open house in January as well in person, and then a virtual one in April. It was really great. I was there for the FRX and chatting with people that are getting on and off the bus there, as well as drivers, to hear some of those stories of kind of what they see, and having that input really dictate some of the way that we formed our analysis when it came to evaluating scenarios. Some of the input pieces, we had 170 responses, and as you may expect, we had 64% say that they do not ride transit. Of those that did ride transit, there were some specific things that they were looking for: recreation, shopping, errands, work trips, which if you think about the FRX and what the purpose of it is, maybe it doesn't serve all of those things today, but there's opportunities with a study like this to think about serving those types of trips. Additionally, we asked them what would encourage you to ride transit more frequently. And so some of those things are more destinations, having longer operating hours, being the actual stop closer to home, right? If it feels like there's a gap and it's disconnected, it's really not convenient, so why take it? And then more frequency. So these are really important inputs as we start to develop analysis and scenarios. Lastly, one of the things that we wanted to ask were, if you had transit take you somewhere that you really wanted to go, where would that be? And so nearby communities ranked high. I'll show you a map in a moment. Downtown Raleigh, which is already served. And then ultimately downtown shops and restaurants here, not outside of this community, but here. And so those are really big findings for us. You can see here, these are specific pins, kind of the density. So the darker purple are the places that people told us this is where they would like to go. If they were going to get on transit and it served these places and it was convenient, that's important for them. And so you can see kind of the 55 corridor toward Holly Springs, as well as right here in kind of the core part of your community. Big picture, more destinations is really important. Having more frequent service so that it doesn't feel like you're waiting. If you miss the one bus, that you lost the opportunity for a trip. Access to not only the places that are maybe fun and kind of shopping, but also services that you may need daily. And then having amenities such as shelters, seating, lighting, signage, Wi-Fi, all of these things that make you feel connected and make it actually more convenient to get around. I think some of the important things for us to consider we've put on here is that the populations that you're serving, specifically seniors, those that maybe don't, or kind of moving to a place where they don't want to drive a car or they don't feel comfortable behind the wheel, connecting seniors to services as well as to the housing, that's closing those gaps. Students, from a wide variety of student ages, again, that's a big population that doesn't drive, or maybe that they don't necessarily have to. And then ultimately, you have new growth and development happening all over your community. And so being forward thinking of how do we make those connections and having them be really intuitive and convenient for people. All of that input, as well as looking at your existing conditions, led to a few key goals that if we're going to evaluate scenarios, we want to make sure that they are based in something. And so those goals are to really improve mobility options for all. This goes even beyond transit, but really making sure that people have choice and that it's safe and connected. The next is to make it really convenient. And so if it's not seamless, said this multiple times, it's probably the reason that any of us, if we've ever been somewhere, decided not to get on the bus, felt confusing, you didn't feel comfortable doing it, it wasn't just really intuitive where it would take you, and so it has to be convenient if we want to not only have utilitarian trips, but also choice riders. Support growth and development, and so this is leveraging the places, this is like more of the geospatial side of where development is occurring in your community and the places that you've already invested. And then there's also leveraging efficiency. And this is more about the operations of what is already happening within your community or in surrounding communities that you can take advantage of if you're going to look at transit service differently. So with that, we looked at a variety of scenarios. You can see here, taking kind of the existing conditions and those goals from public input, we really started to think through a variety of options. And then those options were we used criteria that were based on those goals to create, ultimately land on a preferred scenario. These are some, just really quickly, we looked at a variety of loops, and all of these ultimately came back to, we're missing something, we need to add something, there's a change that needs to be made so that we can meet the goals. And so you'll see here the criteria. Each one of those goals had a number of criteria associated with it, and so improve mobility options for all. We were really thinking about population served, activity centers, making transit convenient. It's the user experience, it's the access to other options to move around. Supporting growth and development, so this is about the geospatial side, where is it serving, and then also thinking about phasing opportunities for future development. And then lastly, leveraging efficiencies, the regional connections and connectivity, and then that it's compatible with all of the technology that is already being used. And so with that, the preferred alternative is really what we landed on. And so I'll walk through this a little bit more detail, but I think the zoomed out version is important to start with, is that you have the FRX, that's there in orange, that's connecting to downtown Raleigh, and then the two additional preferred alternatives are a circulator loop in kind of the core around Judd Parkway, as well as an express service to Holly Springs that connects to the 305 and serves other communities nearby. So we'll dive into this a little bit more. The preferred circulator route is broken into a phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1, which is kind of the recommended place to start, is going in the clockwise direction. I think it's important to notice a few things here with this. We were looking at the Judd Parkway loop, but really making strategic dips into town, so it's serving some of those destinations and other services. You can see senior housing locations listed here, as well as schools, parks, municipal buildings. And so, and really, this also shows where we had all of those pins on the map early on from public input. These are some of the destinations, that darker purple, of where people said they would, if they could use transit or if it served those locations, this is where they would want to go. And so this clockwise direction is really important. Phase 2 of this, which we'll note in just a moment, is adding a counterclockwise option to the same circulator, but really starting with the clockwise direction. Some of the operation pieces here, this is a approximately 9-mile loop, one direction. The clockwise we're recommending a 30-minute headway or frequency. And so again, this gets to the reliability of service. So if you miss the one bus, you know it's coming every 30 minutes. The span of hours, 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., and then also extending that service Monday through Saturday, giving opportunities so that people can explore. It connects to some great destinations within your community. And so why stop that just during the weekdays when there are events on the weekends, specifically Saturdays, that could be accessed by transit? The proposal would be that this would be a free cost, free for riders, and this would match really what we're seeing in other communities that offer circulator routes like an Apex or a Wake Forest. Some of the key destinations you can see on here, there's some specific destinations or stops that we would anticipate having higher ridership. Places like Town Hall, shopping and grocery centers near Judd Parkway and Main Street, as well as the kind of shop in downtown areas of Fuquay and Varina. And then you can see here the stops. For phase one, it's 30 stops on that 9-mile loop. And then if you were to add phase two, that counterclockwise is 29. I will note that one of the reasons clockwise was really important is that because of development that's already occurred, there's actually less cost for some of the stop infrastructure. It already exists, and so it would be a lower initial cost on that. But if you were to add the counterclockwise, there's more shelters and pads and things like that need to be added. Going on to the express service, this is that connection from downtown Fuquay-Varina to Holly Springs. So similar to the FRX, you would have at the South Park Community Center kind of boarding and alighting there, connect you to the future park and ride of Holly Springs, as well as into the core of their town. This would then connect to the 305 route going to Apex, Cary, and ultimately downtown Raleigh, with all kinds of other connections and opportunities to RTP, Durham, RDU, et cetera. The express route is 6.5 miles one way. This would be operating both directions as an express route and then match kind of the 305 frequency, which is every hour, every 60 minutes. Similar with the span of hours being 6 to 8 p.m., Monday through Saturday. This would have a cost associated with it. Approximately, it would be $3 in each direction, with those 3 stops being the South Park Community Center, the future park and ride in Holly Springs, and then downtown Holly Springs. Last pieces here for me. Vehicle types, when we're thinking about circulators, we usually see those being smaller vehicles, kind of these cutaway type of vehicles that can be branded in a variety of different ways. And then for the express, you're looking at more of a 40-foot bus that's operating in both directions. A few things when it comes to cost. So again, phase one for annual operating costs of the circulator route. This includes everything that we just mentioned, the 9 miles, 30-minute headways, the 16 hours of service. And you can see here the annual operating cost being almost $1.2 million. If you were to add in phase two, this is both having both the counterclockwise and the clockwise direction, a little bit, almost $2.4 million for the operating costs. This was based upon the operating costs for the Wake Forest loop today. It is a little bit of a longer route, but the revenue cost per mile is very similar. And that's for fiscal year 2022, so pretty recent cost estimating. For the Express, this is actually taken from operating costs of the FRX, and you can see the same idea here where you have in both directions 13 miles, the one hour frequency, the span of hours, time of day, and that being about $440,000 from annual operating costs. If you were to just shift that, similar to the FRX, to just kind of peak hour travel, you could see the cost reduction there to around $130,000 annual. We did want to just mention this, that there are 2 other things we looked into. If for some reason with the circulator you said, hey, we have great events on Sundays and there's other activities that we want people to be able to connect to, that increased service on another day for the 30 minutes, 30-minute frequency would bring you to 1.3, almost 1.4 million in an annual operating cost, up from the little bit under 1.2. And then for the circulator phase, if you wanted to change it from every 30 minutes to every hour, maybe even starting that way, the cost almost is, the bus is coming less often, so therefore the cost would be about half of that. Lastly, we did want to touch on the actual stops themselves. This is around that comment of why we chose clockwise as the phase one. So we would have 272,000 would be adding in infrastructure for those stops, those 30 stops, and that includes sidewalks, kind of minimal sidewalk connections, the concrete pad, lighting, signage, and benches. We would, if you were going to add the opposite direction, that would be an additional 405,000, again, because a lot of that infrastructure is not there today. So really leveraging what's already been done. Last things, the recommendation from this study is to really start to think about partnering with those agencies, Go Raleigh, Go Triangle, to think about adding in this service. And then when it comes to the funding, there's a lot of opportunities to look at grant funding, using matches from whether it's a line item in a budget or if it's other grants or opportunities with state, local, federal funding that can be used as matches. And I believe that's all from me. I'm gonna stop and ask if there's any questions. I know that was a lot. I'd heard recently someone say, I just power washed you with information. So if there's anything I can do.
So that was good. I appreciate you presenting that. So when you say the funding and there's grant funding, so I'm assuming that means the other 50% comes from the town and that's funded through the town. I got to assume that's on the taxpayers. Is that?
Yes. Well, so let me also say that there's.
Trying to make sure everybody understood that when we were going through this.
There's also, so there's other funds. You can, for example, the Community Funding Area Program, the first one here on the screen, it does require a 50% match, but you can actually find other grant funding to make up that match. So there's opportunities to leverage funding in a variety of different ways.
Have we started any of that on the town side about, are we looking into multiple options, or how's that being budgeted through the town?
Well, we haven't started budgeting for it yet, other than we are forecasting and have put in our proposed fiscal year 24 budget some funding to potentially participate in this project. But again, tomorrow night, the town board will hear this same presentation and then ultimately make a decision going forward. May I ask a question?
Sure, yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
So I see you have CFAP funding, I see you have LAP funding. What is the likelihood that you would get funding over the course of a 5-year period to help offset your initial cost? Because LAP projects are extremely competitive, and you may get it 1 year, you may not get it. The criteria changes, so if the municipality committed itself to a program like this and it was told it could get funding to subsidize taxpayers' dollars, what is the likelihood that in perpetuity we would get funding down the road?
It's a hard question to answer when it comes to perpetuity of funding anywhere. So I don't know if I have a clear answer on that. I would absolutely be willing to look into to see if there's any records of once a community started that funding, if they ever lost it, or what were the reasons for that changing, and get back to you.
That'd be some great research, yeah.
I also wanted to just note that all of those costs, when we talk about specifically the circulator, we are proposing those costs to be fare free, and so that is why that cost is what it is. You're not actually collecting any money, so you're paying the upfront cost for a service. And so if for some reason, again, that matches other circulators in the area, if for some reason you did want to add a cost to that, then those would change as well.
Do you think that, I'm sure it doesn't, it's probably a stupid question, but when you start to add a fee to it, you're looking at 64% of people don't ride it now. So if you add a fee, how does that correlate to you added more stops? So that made more interest, but now you added a fee. Do you have any idea how that plays into it when studies and stuff you guys have done?
It really comes back to convenience and intuitiveness. You know, a lot of research talks about the psychology of riding transit, and so that barrier of not really knowing what to do is a huge barrier to get over. And so fare free is kind of removing some of that barrier to riding transit. There are places that have started fare free and for events added fare options to kind of capture some things, but in general, we're seeing more and more places try their best to be fare free to basically provide a service for their communities.
Right, and I mean, so with any of these funding programs, I'm not familiar with any of them. Do any of them require like any kind of threshold for participation as far as riding? I mean, somebody who's given a grant or giving funding, if I was given a grant, I'm going to fund a bus or a system like this, but I'm only getting 10% of people riding it, I'm going to wonder why I'm giving them money.
On the upfront side, I don't think that there's like a threshold because really you're making the case that we're adding something new that we've never done before. I think that also goes to trying to estimate ridership. You know, you don't offer a circulator or a fixed route outside of a single express. So comparing that to, or trying to estimate based on a service that you don't currently provide is a really difficult task.
Right.
And so I think that when you're recommending or you're writing an application for those types of funds, that's the story that you're telling, and you're giving them, you know, we see the development, we see what's happening within our community, we believe there's a high propensity or a likelihood of people riding transit if we offered a service, and then you're hoping that that story resonates to get those funds. It's a pretty it's very competitive and compelling when you're telling people that we want to invest in place and giving people mobility options. That is part of that story.
Right.
So in addition to getting some additional research on, I guess, the amount of funding you can get consecutive years, one thing I would be interested in, and you kind of touched on it responding to the chair's question, is forecasting ridership. Now, you presented, and I think it was like $1.2 million. If 11 people ride the bus a day, in your report, it shows that the FRX, the ridership has significantly dropped since the pandemic. But one of the things I would be interested in, and I know the town board is very interested in, is how do you forecast ridership? Obviously, we have to make a business decision here, and although it's not currently offered, I mean, $1.2 million on an annual basis, assuming you didn't get anything subsidized, is a lot of money for a service that maybe only X amount of people would ride per month. So I don't know if there's a formula or what type of criteria that you all could expand on, but that would be something that we would be interested in learning more about.
Yeah, it's, again, when you don't offer that service today, it's really just looking at other comparable or other examples in your region. So for instance, Wake Forest, their loop in 2019, pre-pandemic, served 29,000 trips. And so the loop is larger, it's 16 miles. So you would say that connects to a variety of places, but it also operates on 60 minutes, and so it's coming by less frequently. You could even say a smaller loop like yours, 9 miles, that dips into town and kind of connects to more destinations, potentially could serve more trips. Again, those are hard things. The reason that we say potentially is because we don't exactly know. The other thing to recognize with any type of service that you're adding that's brand new is that for new transit service, you need to think of it as something that will mature over time. Ultimately, in the first 2 years of any type of circulator or fixed route service, you are proving the reliability of that service. Why should anybody come and ride that circulator or that bus if they don't think it is reliable, or they don't have can't put trust in that service? There's a lot of kind of responsibility on that phase of it. From the town side, it's promoting and educating that this is an opportunity, this is a service for you that you should be taking advantage of. And there's also kind of like proving it on the daily side of, hey, we have great amenities at our stops so that the person that rides it one day tells their friend to ride it the next day and tells their friend's kid to ride it the day after that, and it goes on and on and on. So again, I don't think that from a formula side, we're not seeing that be really reliable, and so we'd rather lean on the fact that you have land uses that really connect with the idea of transit service. And at the end of the day, Transit's a tool for your community to think about getting around here. So whether they're commuting a long way, once they get here, they can leave, ditch the car and they can ride the bus.
All right.
So, the kind of the comment I have on this is that, obviously the citizens benefit. The citizens that can access this, which is actually the way it's laid out, is a significant number of our citizens could be able to access this. And then, of course, the businesses in all these areas also would benefit, even including like our healthcare and our government businesses, which is a business.
Mm-hmm.
They would benefit from being able to service the citizens better with something like this. So, it's real easy to look at kind of just the strict numbers per rider, but in terms of the entire service structure that the town of Fuquay-Varina provides, and the fact that it does help the businesses that are on these stops, and that would even include some of the more dense housing that we've been promoting. It's like we've been promoting this so that we kind of have to it's going to be a long rolling thing, but it probably is time for Fuquay to step up and do something like this to make that argument. Another question I had was on the, is there, because I'm I'm doing some math myself, but is there a benefit for doing rather than a single counterclockwise circulator every 30 minutes, maybe doing a counterclockwise and a counterclockwise every hour, so that you're kind of, if I miss the bus that went that way, well, I can catch the bus in 30 minutes that's going the other way. I may have to take a longer, but it's 9 miles. So again, I think the point that you made though about that we have to build out infrastructure for that phase 2 counterclockwise was the one that okay, yeah, so that's basically building the counterclockwise is really an entire new route. It's not the same route, it's a different route altogether.
In a lot of ways, absolutely.
Right.
Again, just from the infrastructure side of it, and so I think that when you're starting to explore options, really what this recommendation is that we've really thought through some of the destinations that need to be connected and the opportunities to add transit service. Really, when it comes to what the funding is and how it's structured and what that frequency is, there are still some options. The reason we added in there the opportunity to do the clockwise at 60 minutes and cut the cost was because that could be the right place to start, is to say we have this loop that comes every hour. I will say Wake Forest does do every hour, both directions currently. Their loop is a little bit longer, but just hearing from residents there that it's a long time to wait.
Well, yeah, I just remember when we were doing some of the transit planning for Wake County, that was kind of the comment. If you can't, I missed the bus, but if I just wait here long enough, the next one will be here soon enough. And that's usually about 20 minutes. Obviously, we're not going to be able to support something like that, but 30 minutes kind of fits into that window of, okay, I'll just, grab a coffee and then catch the next one.
And I think a lot about when you mentioned the connections to services specifically for senior residents, the idea of, hey, I have an appointment and I know that the bus is coming every 30 minutes, that adds a lot of value to connect to those service appointments.
Are there any talking about funding, how about Wake County and even the Wake County school system? Is there a way, I don't know, and maybe that's more of a question for the town, to start looking at, is there a way to get some synergies there where, there's some trade-offs or actual funding, because we would be providing services. I mean, I did notice it went by a few schools, not too many, but a few, because most of our schools are being built out farther out because, we need a lot of room for all those students. But, and then of course, Wake County itself, they've already got some. This would probably help replace some of their on-demand services as well. So if there can be kind of a way to pitch that as well, I think that might be working.
Yeah, it looks like it goes by the Southern Regional Center, right, Pam?
Right,
On there.
right.
So I mean, that's.
But also there, the Wake County is already kind of decided to work on
Right.
transit, they contribute for Wake, the countywide transit.
Right.
So it's worthwhile maybe to look and see, would we get some support from them? And like I said, I added the school system because there is a tendency for, more and more for school systems to try to, it's usually in bigger cities, but, if there's something we can work out with the school system.
Leverage those transit
And
services.
which again, this also comes back to the county, right? So, looking to the county to help us out, and maybe even with these express routes as well. Those things are really gonna help connectivity throughout. I love the Holly Springs Express because what it really does is it closes the loop. And then really does give Fuquay-Varina access to that entire, which is actually developing very nicely in Apex and Cary, as well as, Holly Springs being able to shoot into it, so. That's the other thing and the other, on those buses, we talked about EVs earlier. Are those buses capable of being converted to EV, or is it realistic to have a bus that's kind of going all day long to really be able to be an electric? Or is it basically, we're kind of looking at, let's just do the basics and.
You're asking really good questions about when it comes to EV and fuel types. I'm not seeing circulator routes move fully to that, just because you want that vehicle to be moving a lot.
There's no time to stop to charge.
Yeah, so more of those on kind of like CNG, or I do know that Greensboro just added electric charging to one of their stations for their buses. Conversion is probably not an option, but like the purchase of vehicle. There's also some other types of vehicles that could be thought through, but we're just kind of showing what the typical would be.
Right, and again, I think that's something to think about for the future as we put these together. Is there a way that, when we do that vehicle infrastructure, because, if we do manage to keep it for 5 years from now, it's probably going to need to go to something besides an internal combustion engine.
I just rode today, in fact, the Cary's autonomous driverless electric shuttle
Cassie?
up in Bond Park. And the interesting thing, they said in March it was doing really well, a full day, but now with air conditioning coming on,
Oh, yeah.
it now has to take a break from 12:30 to 1:30 and recharge.
Yeah,
So there's some southern climate challenges too.
Yeah, this bus will have the same thing, but just making sure that we kind of added that thought pattern to the future planning for this as well.
Great comment.
How quickly is this service implemented?
Yeah.
How long does that take?
As soon as you have funding in place,
Well, I mean, I'm talking about building everything out. Is that something that we would handle?
you
in
could.
the town, we would do all the construction, everything, get it done.
Yeah, it's, from a construction side, really, when we're thinking about what those pieces are, I just want to bring this back up. Kind of like from a stop infrastructure,
Yeah.
it's concrete pads to make sure that you can, have ADA accessibility of boarding and alighting. The sidewalk piece is really small pieces. It's not really long infrastructure. Lighting, signs, benches, trash cans, shelters. These are all things that at a municipality
Not a
level,
long period of time.
fairly easy to do, and is something that in a lot of ways could, if you're thinking about transit even in the future, could be built into other projects or CIP and other things if you're thinking about adding counterclockwise in the future.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be an all at once type of
And
thing.
One more question. So
Yeah.
when you keep bringing up Wake Forest, at what percentage did they, so you said 64% here would not use the transit. What was it in Wake Forest whenever they decided to implement this service? I'm curious on what their percentage was at compared to here for them to actually say, yes, let's do it.
I don't have the answer to that. I can ask that question
Curious
and
on
get
that.
back to you.
They're kind
I will say,
smaller, like we are, more spread out.
Right.
Not the Apex or Holly Springs, but they're kind of
Yep.
mirrored us a little bit. So I'm curious if theirs was higher or lower than ours, and they.
yeah,
thumbs up.
I would guess it was probably around the same. Again, this is complete guess on my part. I do know that it's one of the things that they continually try to educate people on.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people in their community that don't know the bus is free. And so you can just hop on anywhere
Yeah.
and ride the loop, and it takes you to groceries, it takes you to a variety of different destinations. Kids on a rainy day,
Yeah.
if you're looking for a thing to do. So,
Good question. Because I was sitting there looking at it going,
I'm curious.
3% ride this thing every day, and now we're gonna have taxpayers to pay 50% of it, but only 3%. And even if you bump that up and say a few times a week, we're still under 10%.
That was my like thinking,
Yeah.
like depending on like when is the time to implement something.
I think if you're gonna look at ridership, though, you're gonna get,
It's just a balance, you know?
Yeah,
And-
it's like how many people go to the park, right? If I have a park that I've paid $1 million to make, what percentage of the town actually uses that park? And it's going to be an equal small percentage, right?
I was just in DC with the Urban Land Institute, and we had a really interesting talk from the Metro, and they found out two very different things, that the Washington subway is ridden by commuters, peak times.
Right.
The buses are ridden by locals throughout the day. The FRX is a commuter peak time. That is very different from a circulator and who it would serve and where they're going.
Right, so you're just kind of making a decision based
So
off
you
what
really
you
can't
think.
use
And you're
those
basing it off a
comparable.
surveyed and,
Yeah.
You may, especially as parking becomes a problem in downtowns, or, you want to park once and then spend the day shopping or doing the events that are in downtown. You may drive in, but then if you can just hop, and I do this in Raleigh. When I go to Raleigh, if I find a parking spot, I'm gonna hold on to it, and I'm gonna just take the R line around and get to where I wanna go. So, that's kind of the other side of it, is that, again, I know that it's real easy to kind of get caught up in ridership, especially if you compare it to the entire citizenry, but that's
it
gonna
is,
be
it's
a hard-
just, I
that's-
mean, you
that's
just
definitely-
looking at the budgets, I mean, like, I'm looking at $272,000 for 30 stops. I think that number's probably low. I mean, that's $9,000 a stop. We almost can't do anything for $9,000 these days, so, you just gotta balance it all out. I was just curious what the percentage
Yeah.
was.
There are also
And I
lots
also
of
think
funding
that-
opportunities we'll explore for these
Oh,
capital improvements.
capital costs are.
Right, and that was gonna be when I was gonna ask you guys as staff, I mean, have you guys talked about how you're gonna implement this for development? I mean, there's a lot, when we just did the land use plan, there's a lot of activity centers that we put in the land use plan with big tracts of land, which I've gotta assume you're gonna wanna incorporate into a transit if it falls within that loop.
We're
And
just interviewing consultants for a CTP update, so this would be an awesome, we
Right.
could add
So-
bus stops and
so does
things
that
to
fall
the
upon the
CTP.
development itself to provide those stops? Yeah.
Potentially, good.
Yeah, so that's kind of the,
Exploring all options,
yeah, I get you, yeah, that's a good
all
answer.
cost-effective options.
I do think
right?
I do think at some point you want to try to figure out how to get that loop to touch Carolina Gardens at some point. 'Cause it's kind of unfortunate that the biggest, kind of the senior center living area in this town doesn't get a stop. I mean, I know it's outside of that loop and it's an outlier, but that's a lot of potential riderships. And taking that, especially as they're building the new hospital over that 401, I think you could get some riders going that direction, but
Yeah.
it doesn't hit it. So
Yeah.
I think that's gonna go back to that convenience factor.
Yeah.
If I've gotta drive all the way in and then I gotta wait an hour to get there, I might as well just drive to the hospital myself, or
I
wherever
like
you're
the commute from here to Holly Springs. I think that would be
Right.
utilized more for sure for people that work out that way. And just the fact that I actually, so I Uber during the nights on Friday and Saturday nights, and I'll catch people in Fuquay. They say, man, there's no Ubers around here. So they can't catch rides to get to certain places. So, and you do a lot of, most of the things outside of Fuquay, obviously. But something like this to Holly Springs where people kind of work or need something to do, or the theaters out that way, where they have more entertainment things to do. I think that would be utilized, and I think if we could, that would be the main focus before we get the loop inside of Fuquay, to me. The one that would be the most cost effective, and that one's, you said $3 a ride, right? So that one would at least be turning something as well as upfront costs as well. So that would be where
Except we're gonna encourage people to come from Holly Springs to our restaurants.
Yeah, I mean, the same thing. Yeah, it's the same thing. It's like
The
either
unfortunate part
or.
with that though is it
Yeah.
stops at 8.
Yeah.
You almost need that to go to 11.
Yeah.
In order for that to become viable.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I agree with you. I think that's probably it.
So what kind of time frame are we talking about?
For implementation. So this study really is taking a look at, if you're going to expand, what does that expansion look like? And then saying, here's the potential costs that it would be, options on moving forward. Really, this is a conversation to be taken forward when it comes to, are you going to adopt it? Where would you invest? Where are you going to find that funding? Timing is as fast as the money comes in most places, so.
And so the operating cost, if we don't do it for 3 years, the operating cost remains the same. Is that definite? No.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
That's why we use 2022 fiscal year dollars, so that we could give you something that's like,
Right.
as relevant as we can, and that if you didn't do something for 3 years, thinking about what escalation could be. Now, in 3 years, there could be other grant funding opportunities that we don't foresee now too, so there's both sides.
Okay, thank you.
So you're not gonna guarantee the price of diesel fuel not gonna go up in 3 years?
Well, if you're moving to electric, then you don't need to worry about diesel fuel.
There you go.
I'm not going to guarantee those
Yeah,
things.
fair enough.
Then
I
we've
wouldn't
got the
either.
price of electric vehicles,
Yeah,
and
that's
the
right.
prices keep going up.
Exploring all options.
That's right.
There are a lot of them.
All right, we have any more questions?
I have one question, going back to the express on, up to Holly Springs. I've said for a long time, we need that connection to the 305. I personally would use it multiple times to be able to get to work back and forth. You did note that it's a $3 cost to riders, and that seems a little bit high compared to what providers were charging pre-COVID. So during COVID, providers are zero fare. I think discussions are ongoing about returning to fare sometime possibly in the future. Why $3? Where did that come from?
I believe that we're kind of looking at, again, escalation of costs and really saying, hey, there's a pre-COVID number. I believe that also Go Triangle is going back to fares in June of this year. Is that, no? My
I work
300
for
bus.
Triangle now.
Okay. There's the Go Raleigh bus that's going up to, back to fares. But really just kind of adding in the escalation of what that cost would be and giving you a value. So if you wanted to go down, that could be incorporated. If you wanted to go up, that would be as well. So just kind of a baseline number.
You're changing your subsidy, there's always a subsidy, it's just changing how much, whether it's a
Yeah,
lot
what
or-
you're paying.
Yep.
Gas is higher than pre-COVID, so there we go. Price goes up, there you go, done deal, $3.
I'm with Michelle, you're talking about $6 a day.
Well, so pre-COVID, Raleigh was $1.50 round trip for the FRX. And Go Triangle pre-COVID was, I'm gonna say $2.25 round trip. So, $3. Inflation, yes,
But
probably if providers do return, it's gonna be
That's
a little bit
$3
higher.
each way.
Like, yeah, so
Yeah, that's
$3
a-
each
so
way
it's a
is
$6
a lot
round trip.
more
It's a
than what
$6
we were
round trip.
looking at pre-COVID in the area. So, that's something that we wanna look at and consider when we do.
Also great opportunities to partner with employers and others that may have great things that you can add on to and subsidize in other ways.
I'm excited. Let's do this, Jim.
Yeah,
Tomorrow, sound good?
make it happen.
It's great information.
Good answer.
All right. Anybody
right.
else have any more questions? No.
Thank you.
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you
that.
all.
Appreciate
Thank
it,
you.
thank you.
All right, we'll move on to 6A, administrative reports. Purpose of this agenda item is to receive information on the disposition of the planning board's recommendations to the town board commissioners since March 2023. So interesting, seeing there wasn't really anything in there. So I'm gonna go with there's probably not any questions. So with that, we'll move on to adjournment.
Motion to adjourn.
We have a motion?
Second.
Have a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We're adjourned.